Well, I've just about recovered from what was, I think, one of the most important demonstrations and the most groundbreaking films that have taken place. The film was obviously shown. The demonstration took place on Saturday in Telford. I'm wearing my England shirt today. I'm wearing my England shirt for a reason. Because a few years ago, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I made a speech and I asked where were the men of England. Now on Saturday, a large number of the men of England stood up and stood in the cold and stood to honour and demand justice for one girl, Nicole. And Nicole is a very, very, very brave young woman. A young woman who has suffered unimaginably. And when you see the film, and one of the shocking things about this platform that I'm putting this video on and others, that this film will be heavily censored. When this film is broadcast on the mainstream, as it were, platforms, and let's hope that Getter becomes a mainstream platform in the sense it gets a mainstream audience, but keeps its free speech absolutism. When this film is shown on platforms, it has to be disguised, it has to be hidden, it has to be made difficult for the Stasi in these various different organisations to find it and ban it. And of course, there's nothing in the film that should allow it to be banned. It's telling the truth, and it's telling the truth about what happened to a young lady from a very small market town in the Midlands called Telford. And Saturday, anybody that was there on Saturday, there was an energy about Saturday. It was positive. I'd say some very, very serious people were at that demonstration on Saturday. But it was a completely peaceful demonstration. There was no violence whatsoever. There were several infiltrators in the crowd, it appeared, but they were ushered away. And that demonstration, I believe, as we said on Saturday, and as Tommy had said before, that demonstration drew a line in the sand. And it said, no more. We're not going to put up with this anymore. And if the police and the authorities don't do something about it, those men that stood there at that demonstration, they will be gathering intelligence. They'll be doing surveillance. They'll be watching. They'll be listening. They'll be finding out what's going on in their areas. And they'll be building cases, town by town, city by city, against these people. And the information that's gathered will be used in film format, will be used to name and shame the ringleaders of these mafia gangs that are destroying the lives of our children and have done for 40 years. And if you're in one of those mafia gangs, you've been left alone. You've been left unhindered. The police have allowed you to do whatever you want to do to those little girls. 11 convictions, 11 imprisonments, I think, in Telford. I got it wrong. I said 13. I was being optimistic. 11 imprisonments in Telford for heinous crimes against thousands of girls. We know the names of 200 perpetrators. We know who they are. We know where they live. We know where they work. And all the information that's been gathered, Tommy gave an opportunity for the lead police officer in these cases in Telford to receive this information. He didn't want to know. Didn't want to speak to him. What does that tell you about policing in Telford? And of course, they've made an appeal and said if anyone's been affected by this, come forward and we'll reinvestigate the cases. And I think people should go to the police if they've been abused by these tyrants. And I hope that the police act on the information. But I don't think we can just leave it to the police. I think information must be gathered, films must be made, and these monsters must be outed and shown for what they are. And also, we know it's happening now. We know the areas it's happening. And again, those areas where these monsters are operating, they need to be watched. These men need to be spied upon, and the information needs to be gathered and then acted upon by the authorities. And that must start happening now in towns up and down England. So the men of England really must stand up. I'm not calling for vigilantism. I'm not calling for anybody to do anything criminal. I'm calling for the men of England in areas where this is happening, and you know it's happening. You need to start gathering information. You need to start gathering photographic information. You need to start listening to what is being said in your areas. And you need to pass that information to the authorities. And you need to pass it to, if possible, anybody who has got the gumption. It's a good old Northern English word. The gumption to put a film together and expose these people for what they're doing. We see it a lot on Facebook. We see these paedophile hunters that are running around after people. This needs to be done. This rape is taking place on an industrial scale. The information needs to be gathered on an industrial scale. So that's the first point. That must be the line in the sand, that this isn't going to happen anymore. And we're not talking about men with baseball bats doing crazy stuff. We're talking about sensible men gathering information and passing it on to people who make films and passing it on to the authorities, to the police. But as well as that, a deeper question needs to be asked. And this question has not been asked or answered. It's been brushed under the carpet. And sadly, some of the people that claim to be representing victims and working for victims are gatekeepers on this issue. Some of them do fine work, but some of them are gatekeepers on this issue. And what is the issue? The issue is this: what connection is there between Islamic doctrine, Islamic theology, the teaching of the Quran, the life of Muhammad, and the way these grooming gangs operate? Is there a connection? Is it just to do with hillbillies from the badlands of Pakistan and the borderlands with Afghanistan and Kashmir? Is that what the problem is? These guys are just hillbillies from a rough end of the country and they don't know any better? Or is there something in Islamic theology that is causing them to do what they do? And that is a question that needs to be answered by theologians, by Islamic theologians, by Christian theologians, by academics, by people who study Islam. But also it needs to be answered by the general population, who need to look at the texts and find out what the texts say. So that's the other need. The other need, apart from the men of England standing up like they did on Saturday and like they have done in Telford over the past few months. But there needs to be a way of educating people about why it is predominantly Muslim men who are committing these crimes. Now, we always stress this and we always say this, and this is very, very important to say. Not every Muslim man is involved in grooming. Far from it. Far from it. However, 90% of the men, or around 90%, I think it's 87% according to the Quillian Foundation, so it's as good as 90%, 90% of the men who are involved in these cases are Muslim men. And again, when we looked at the statistics and we did a statistical analysis of what was happening in Telford, we found, I think, if memory serves me right, of the population of Telford, of the male Muslim population or Pakistani Muslim population of Telford, it appeared that about 40% had been involved. I think there was around 250 names that had been given to us that had been involved in this child sexual exploitation, this specific crime of gang-related grooming, where it can be cousins, uncles, brothers, fathers, sons involved in this organised criminality. And so that's another question. The first question is, will the men of England actually now stand up? Many very, very good men came to that demonstration on Saturday. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know these men over the past few years. Some very good men came to that demonstration, very capable men. Will they now start doing the needful work on the ground of surveillance and gathering intelligence, passing it on to people who make videos and passing it on to the authorities? That's the first question. Second question is, will the academic scholars who study Islam and who know what's in those texts be honest about what's in those texts and make that information available to the people of England in a way that they can understand, in a way that they can comprehend? Most people do not have time to spend years upon years studying religious texts to find out what's in them. So there needs to be a way of that information being put in a very simple and straightforward way to the people of England. And that's not in any way saying that people aren't intelligent enough to look at those texts. It takes a lot of time and effort to dig into those texts. So somebody needs to do that. We need to have all the information at hand. And finally, and this is something that's never really talked about, and it should be talked about, we need to talk about the connection between the rape gangs, the rape jihad gangs, as I call them, and this Pakistani Muslim mafia that operates up and down the spine of England and right the way up in Scotland. It goes from Glasgow right the way down the spine of the country to Luton, and probably into London as well, but certainly to Luton. We know it exists. We know they're involved in people trafficking, importing, distribution and selling of heroin. We know that they're involved in the rape and abuse of children, both Sikh and white children. We know that they have been involved in people trafficking, money laundering. They seem to be getting heavily into the cocaine industry as well. Obviously cannabis. So there's these criminal gangs, money laundering. There's these criminal gangs operating up and down the country, predominantly Pakistani Muslim. And we need to shine a light on that as well. And that is a question that needs to be screamed at the authorities. What is the connection between the Pakistani mafia and some of the street gangs that are involving children in county lines crime? What is the connection there? And what can be done about it? So that's three things that we can do. Three things that we can do. Three very, very simple things. Watch the grooming gangs. Read the texts, the Islamic texts that tell us about why these crimes are committed by Muslim men. And start watching and shouting about the Pakistani Muslim mafia that has operated in this country. I knew about heroin dealers from the Pakistani community in Middlesbrough in the early 1980s. I knew that they were involved with white girls even then. Didn't understand it because I was only a kid myself. But in the 1980s it was going on. So this is a long, long time. This is coming up to 50 years, you know. It's a long, long time for these crimes to have been committed. And that's a network that is now very well established and very, very deeply embedded. But again, through fear of being called racist and other factors, this has been brushed under the carpet. And those three questions are very important. But this is another question I just want to pose to anyone that's watching this tonight. Could it be that the security services, MI5, and whoever else is involved, the probably different manifestations of what we used to call special branch in Northern Ireland, are actually protecting these criminal gangs as long as the criminal gangs pass information onto the state about jihadists? Could that be a possibility? That there is we'll turn a blind eye if you keep us on our toes about people that are involved in jihadist terrorism? That wouldn't surprise me. I have no evidence for that. I can't prove that. But that's a question that I think we should ask, and we need to find ways of finding answers to that question. So that's takeaway from this weekend. The men of England turned up, and I'm thankful for that. And as a close, I want to say this. There's a giving page There's a new media company set up. I think it's called Urban Scoop. I'll put the links in the description of the video. There's a media page there for giving to Nicole, Justice for Nicole. Please, please give to Nicole. She was very brave, and she's not done this for money. She said that to me personally. She said she's not done this for money. But I know that Nicole wants to write a book. I know that Nicole wants to get involved in helping people that have suffered at the hands of these monsters. And I think it'd be a nice thing if we could help Nicole. She's a mum who's raising, I think, 4 kids. She is extremely brave, extremely courageous, but she needs your help. So I would ask that you would give to the giving page that's been set up by Urban Scoop to give Nicole money so that she can support herself. And again, we're talking, that girl needs, young woman needs a lot of money to do what she wants to do. She's ambitious. She's got some really good plans. And apart from anything else, I think considering how much of a risk she's taken making the film that she's made, she deserves to be looked after by our movement. So please give to Nicole. Very, very important. And also the new organisation, Urban Scoop. I'm absolutely nothing to do with it. I don't work for the organisation. I don't benefit in any way from it. But if they're going to make films like they've just made, well, I think they deserve funding from our movement to help them to make the films that they're going to make. So again, just my thoughts on what we do going forward and how we can move this thing to another level. It's entirely up to you whether you listen or whether you just say, there's a mad old man with a grey beard and a white England shirt ranting. But I don't think that's the case. I think you will listen. And I think the men of England are rising up to deal with this situation. And the sooner the better, because the line in the sand has been drawn. And as we said on Saturday, it stops now. Thank you. Good night.